Welcome, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. We'll wait just a few more moments here while we welcome some more participants as people are just logging in here. It's always fun at this point in a webinar as presenters to see that participant count just start to tick up.
Start ticking up. Yeah, I see a lot of my staff are joining. So hello, Mennonite Church USA staff. Thank you for joining us today.
And I see Menno Media board members, Menno Media staff as well. Authors, great.
Yeah, I see some familiar names there on the list.
Wonderful. Well, we'll get started and we'll keep welcoming people as they join us. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, whether you are joining us live right now or if you're watching this later on YouTube. We are recording this live webinar to post later on YouTube. My name is Amy Gingrich and I'm publisher and executive director at Menno Media and its book imprint Herald Press. And today I want to welcome author Glen Guyton, who is with us here today.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Amy, for having me on this webinar today.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Glen's new book is called Reawakened, Activate Your Congregation to Spark Lasting Change. And it just came out in late April 22, I think was the release date. And through money from Mennonite Church USA, Glen's book has been sent to all pastors in Mennonite Church USA. And so hopefully a number of those pastors are joining us today, having read the book or thinking about reading the book. Glen is executive director of Mennonite Church USA. He is the first African-American to serve in that role. In addition to providing leadership for the denomination, he consults with leaders to help them reap the benefits of developing more diverse, competent organizations, more diverse, inclusive, and culturally competent organizations. Got to read your bio correctly here, Glen.
That's okay.
He is a former Air Force officer, and he has years of experience serving in executive roles, in coaching leaders, and in cultivating relationships with diverse volunteers and donors, in addition to 2 decades of ministry as an ordained minister. He holds a BS in management from the U.S. Air Force Academy and an MS in education from Regent University. He's the father of 2 and a native of Houston, Texas. Glen stays in shape and helps to offset his passion for great food by running. I love it. I think I need to add that to the end of my bio as well.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be talking about how to activate our congregations for effective ministry.
Yes.
We all know that our churches want to make a difference. We know that more and more people are moving away from the church, not because they lack a personal faith in God, but because the church is no longer relevant to their lives. Too many churches have lost that spark necessary to reimagine what it means to make a lasting difference. So in Reawakened, Glen Guyton explores 8 keys to help congregations unlock the power of their mission and bring healing and hope to their communities. Today, we're going to talk about these 8 keys and how they speak into the most urgent needs of a community and offer practical suggestions for how churches can spark holistic and lasting differences in their communities. The book is built on a solid biblical framework, and it's filled with stories, so many stories, great stories, from successful ministries that are actively engaged in communities. Reawakened positions churches as catalysts for transformative mission and change. And the book helps Christians ask these big questions about God's ongoing work in the world and discover the power of the Reawakened church. So again, I know some who are joining us today are people who've already read Glen's book, and some are joining today to decide if they want to read the book, and all are welcome here.
Yes.
You can buy Reawakened directly from Herald Press, the book imprint of Menno Media, or wherever books are sold. I believe there's a link in the chat. We will take time toward the end of this conversation to answer your questions. So please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to add your questions today. Glen, it is so good to have you here talking about your book.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited.
Well, you have been a youth minister.
Yep.
You've worked for the denomination, and now you lead the denomination, Mennonite Church USA.
Yeah.
So my opening question to you is, where would you say you personally have the greatest passion for ministry?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I've always considered myself a lifelong youth pastor. I'm just so interested in helping young people, I guess now people younger than me, just find out who they are, understand their call, and then kind of help guide them through that process. So, mentoring young people or younger people now, that kind of age keeps creeping up as I get older. But that's really where my passion is. I still am in contact with the young people that I started my ministry with. They were 11 years old at the time. Now they're in their 30s. I still connect with them. I still, I guess, mentor them in some sense. I hire them to hire them to help me with some processes. So that's really where my passion is.
Wonderful. And you tell lots of great stories about some of those youth in your book as well. So what is an activated church? That word is right there, the first word in the subtitle of your book. Talk a little bit about what that is and how you see an activated church in action.
Yeah, I think it's really a church that's really engaged in its community. If you think about the story of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall, one of the things that was drilled into my head as a young leader was, if you're a part of a church, the people in the church have to have that mind to work. So that was the moniker of the church that I was brought into the Mennonite faith with, C3, Calvary Community Church in Hampton. We had this big mural of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall. And, our byline was where the people have a mind to work. And I think that's really the core of an activated church. It's not just a group of people that come together to drink coffee and have cookies and catch up on their week, but it's a church where people are motivated, they're inspired, and then they go back into their community and they engage the people in their community. Hope exudes from that church. It's a part of the center of the community.
I think that leads really well into page 32.
Okay.
The opening there for your first chapter. You want to read that part for us?
I'll read that. Maybe this is my audition for an audiobook. The power and purpose of the church. What is the power of the church? The power of the church is not found in its icons, its hierarchy, or its bureaucracy. The real power of the church lies in its ability to transfer the hopes and dreams of its lowest members into action. Simply put, the power of the church lies in transformation. While transformation will look different in different communities and with different people the church serves, the mission of the church is always to prepare people for transformation to happen. This power is illustrated in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Professor Andrew Hill writes, the labors of Ezra and Nehemiah to rebuild and reform post-exilic Jerusalem was largely inspired by the theological truth of Yahweh as covenant keeper. Ezra and Nehemiah illustrated unwavering hope and certainty through which a marginalized community was able to center itself and rebuild. When individuals had specific roles and duties in the process, the institution of religion helped lay the foundation for the restoration and rebuilding of the community.
I love that idea of a solid foundation. As we think about the church has been through an awful lot, obviously in history, but in this last year too. And one of the things you talk about in the introduction, I think it is, of the book, you talk about the relevance of the church. Mm-hmm. And you write that those in younger generations are insisting, does the church really have any relevance or not? And then the church, institutional church, is insisting, hey, I'm still here, we're still here. Yeah. So the world seems to be moving on. It's an interesting time to be thinking and talking about the relevance of the church. I think, this week, the Southern Baptists, for example, you might have followed that in the news headlines about their huge loss of numbers this last year. I think it was something like 400,000, and pressures from left and right and which way you're going to go. And I know we in the Mennonite church aren't immune to some of that either, but what's your vision for the relevance of a church? How does the church be relevant in this particular time?
Yeah, you think about the Bible and the concept of the central sanctuary. Some of my theologians will know about that, but the church being the center of the community and everything kind of flows out from around that. I think we live in an age where people have so many options, right? We have travel baseball, we have Amazon, we have this social club, we have an infinite amount of 501c3 organizations and people that are doing good work. And so the church really has some competition now. And so for the church to be relevant, we really have to find out, what our purpose is. So what's our identity? That's one of the principles that I talk about in the book. What's our identity? What do we bring to the community? And then how can we connect with the community? I think we have become so institutionalized as a church that we've forgotten the power of our faith, the power that God has bestowed upon us as a spiritual organization. Yes, we need good organization. Yes, we need policies, procedures, all of those things. But first and foremost, we have a spiritual connection to the people in our community that is irreplaceable. So how do we live into those things and make a difference in the lives of people? People still need hope, especially coming out of COVID. People are faced with isolation. They're faced with being cut off from other aspects of their community. So this is a prime opportunity for us as a church to get in there to say, hey, what do people need? How can we start building a good foundation in those people's lives, and then connect them to that spiritual presence that we have as a faith community.
I love that idea that we're not going it alone. The transformation is happening. I actually read in an all staff meeting as our opening devotional earlier this week what you write on the bottom of 41 and then the bottom of 42 about why do we think we should be going this alone, right? We need to trust the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's going to show up for us. That churches and religious organizations need to be run well and have sound systems, but we got to make room for the Holy Spirit in all of this too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one sentence on the bottom of page 41 says the transformed church pays attention to the movement of God in the world and responds to it. That was really eye-opening for me when I became first connected to Anabaptist faith in the church. I was raised in the church. I went to Sunday school and read all of the chick tracts. I don't know if y'all are familiar with chick tracts. If you don't live right, you're gonna go to hell and all those things. And I heard all the Bible stories, but I never really connected those Bible stories to what I should be doing today. And that's what I really appreciated about walking into the Anabaptist faith, was that, hey, we're focusing on the life of Christ. It's not about just saving you from hell, but it's how do we live that Christly life now? How do we exercise our faith as we engage the world? And that's just so important for the church. We can't lament, that good old religion. I think I might have quoted that song in the book, give me that old time religion. We can't continue to look back about what the church was like 40 years ago. This is not 40 years ago. This is not even 2 years ago. What the church needs to be in 2021 and moving forward is something different. We can build on some foundations of the past, and that's what this book has, some really solid principles that we can build upon. But how do we engage the next generation? How are we relevant in this digital age? I talk a little bit about being SEO, so search engine optimization, for my geeky people out there. But how do we apply something like that to the church? I have a 20-year-old son who is always online, right? But I walked by him one day and he was online watching somebody preach. I'm like, what? I would have never thought to do that. At 50 years old, getting my church time on YouTube, but he does on a regular basis. He watches videos, he watches pastors preach. And so if we aren't connected in new and different ways, we're going to miss out on a whole generation, because somebody's out there is giving a message to our kids, our young people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, we're going to jump around, and I certainly want to come back to this whole idea of technology and where we go from here and all of that. And it's interesting, you were writing this book. Tell us about your writing timeline and how that kind of overlapped or didn't with COVID.
Yeah, so I was writing a book, and I interviewed some people. I started this before COVID was even thought of, right? And I was going to interview some pastors, and I started talking to them about different things. And then the pandemic hit, and I was going over some of the interviews that I had, went through with some of the pastors and things, and I was like, man, this is really relevant to what's going on now, because we're having to do church in a different way. We no longer have the ability to do our little holy huddle and go to our isolated buildings. Now we are out of physical contact. So what a church is going to do. And so, I changed some things in the book because I didn't want it just to focus on COVID, but I started making some connections with, how the church really had to find new ways to engage and stay relevant when we couldn't meet physically. How do we utilize technology? How do we connect with folks where we can't actually see them physically? And so some of the things in the book, I was like, man, this is really relevant, more relevant than I could have imagined because of the changes that happened with COVID. But some of those things that, I write about as we think about that isolation, again, there's an opportunity for the church to fill some needs. Some churches, the churches that did well during COVID had already instituted some of the things I talked about in regards to technology. Churches that had online giving, churches that already had a digital presence, they were able to hold services. They were able to reach out to their members, and members were engaged. Even today, I talked to a leader in the church that was telling me how they were drawing an international audience. And you don't want to just let that go. You can still build community in very authentic ways in this digital space. I see that with young people all of the time. Now, it's not my preferred way of meeting, but I know it's possible because I've observed how it impacts younger people, and I've just seen how deeply they value even some of those online relationships.
Mm-hmm. You certainly talk about intimate community on pages like 103, 104. You name, the importance of intimate community and sharing. I think it's so highly relevant right now. I know that our Mennonite church congregations in Manitoba are still a far way off from meeting in person. And then, our Mennonite church congregations in Indiana might already be meeting in person. So, we're a little bit all over the map in terms of where we are, but I sense that pastors are looking for real tangible ideas as well. So what ideas do you have? Give us some ideas about how do we build community in this weird time?
Yeah, well, you need to go where people are, right? That's the real key to building community and discipleship. I think if we've learned anything coming out of this pandemic is that if we've centered ourselves around some physical location, that's opens us up to a lot of loss and not being able to really function. So we have to really think about the church, not as a building, but again, as a connection, extension of the community. And so one of the things we need to do is figure out, where are people? How do we engage people? How do we do church outside of the building? I think that will do a lot for us. Not that you have to get rid of your building or anything like that, but how do you begin to engage? So where are young people? Young people are online. You need to be online, set up a digital presence, and have that as part of the work that you do. Small groups are important because I was just on vacation with some friends of mine, and my friend's daughter is, she's in her 30s, but she lives alone. And she was just talking about the isolation that she experienced during COVID. There are a lot of young people out there like that. So how do you connect with them? Think about ways to reach out to people. And, you can combine some online things with some physical activities. I know people do kind of drive-by type things. People have gotten creative with having church in socially distanced locations. But I think the church has to really start thinking about moving outside of its building. Too many of us get trapped in building a building instead of building a church. And so again, finding out where people are and going to those places, small groups. Those are some basic things that I think we've drifted away from, but we need to re-engage that, and developing connections where people can lead small groups. They can disciple small groups of people, and then they come back to a central location to be equipped to make sure everyone is on the same page, those types of things. But really looking at the church as more of a sending type model, as a distribution center versus being the core of what you do.
You talk a lot about the church community as well.
Mm-hmm.
For those who haven't read the book yet, say a little bit more about what you mean about church community, the location of your congregation, and what that means to your church life.
Yeah, and I think we really have to examine, our community and what's around us. So who's coming to our church? Again, some of us may specialize more outreaching with people that come from great distances. The online presence allows us to do that. But what is in the community that we're a part of? Sometimes as I talk to pastors, there's always kind of this balance between, what urban churches can do and what rural churches can do. But each of those communities have unique needs. So part of what you can do is figure out what are the needs of your community that you're a part of. Who can you connect with? Strategic partnerships is one way that we can connect with our community. The church doesn't have to do everything, but the church should, again, be able to connect with different partners to ensure that it's relevant in the community, that it understands the needs of those of the community. As we become more mobile, we've kind of lost some of that connection where we were in more isolated communities. So there's some positives and negatives to that. But I think the churches that really have a good sense of who they are can still thrive, even if the demographics of the community are changing. But I do think that the church should be a reflection, especially of its immediate community that's around it.
Mm-hmm.
You should really be connected with the pulse of what's going on. And how do you do that? You have to form partnerships. You have to get out of your building. You have to talk to people. You have to walk around, not to proselytize, but just to get to know people, get to know your neighbors. Is such a basic concept for us in the church.
You just used a phrase that's really helpful. The church needs to have a sense of who they are. I think this comes right to your first key, which is around identity.
Mm-hmm.
What is your church's identity? Knowing your identity. Our identity is a blueprint for our church vision. You write about that vision creates clarity. I think that is, say more.
It does. And so who are you? What's that chapter I think is called Know Your Identity, Show Your Identity. So what does your church do? One of the things really that I learned early on, even when doing youth ministry, people would come to me with so many good ideas, right? So many good ideas. Hey, can you take our kids to on a college tour? Hey, can you have an after school program for our kids? Hey, can you do a feeding program? I'm like, hey, those are all really great ideas, but this is my focus. My focus is to, help your kids grow in faith. These are the ways that we're going to do that. That kept me focused. It made sure that the resources I had were able to fulfill the needs that I was able to fulfill. And it also allowed me to point people to other places. I say, hey, we don't do college tours, but if you go to this school down the street, or if you go to this community center, they do a great job at that. That allows you to be a good steward of your resources, of your time, but allows you to also do what you're best at. And so, what does your church stand for? I gave some examples, and each chapter of my book has some questions that you can work through. But do you serve the homeless or immigrant population? Hey, that's a great mission. You may be really equipped to do that. Maybe you focus on the elderly. Maybe you focus on helping people find jobs. If you do what you do well, I just think that it creates energy. It creates momentum in the church. People understand why they are a part of your church and what makes your church special, right? I think that's important. I use some business kind of terms and things in the book, and I know sometimes we put off from the church. But if you were going to go to a restaurant, what's your special? What are you known for? Like if I go to IHOP, I'm going to get pancakes. I'm not going to ask for filet mignon. Now, some people eat steak at IHOP, but for me, I'm going to stick with the pancakes because I know it's the international house of pancake. pancakes.
Right.
I may be able to get some other things, but I know if I go to that place, I'm going to get a good pancake. And so if we have pretty well-defined ministries, it creates unity in the body. People come, they know, hey, this is what this church is about. This is what they do. I know that coming in. I know what the vision is. I know what my role is here. I know what my purpose is. I think it really helps us to create strong churches. It minimizes some of the division. And then when people feel like they have something else to do, they can move on and then people can leave in peace. We don't have to have all this heartache and heartbreak when people leave and transition out of our congregations.
You have a line in that section that I double underline. We aren't equipped to be all things to all people.
No.
And I think I'm not in congregational ministry, right? I work at Menno Media, but I think we face those same pressures, and I'm sure you do in the denomination too. How do you define what you're going to be about and stick to that? That can be really hard, I think, for church leaders to define and then carry it out without that pull of, but what about the after school ministry that's one person's project or this? What encouragement do you have for church leaders to stay the course once they have discovered their personal identity or their congregational identity?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, letting people know, just being clear, and I would say somewhat unapologetic about that mission, that call. And you may have to reevaluate it from time to time. It's not about being a dictator, but it's about just having a clear focus. Hey, this is what we do. Are we effective in this ministry? Because, there are a lot of churches, a lot of congregations. We don't need to copy what someone else is doing down the street. Let us feel a unique need. Let us fill a void. And then if there's some other things that need to happen in the community, which there will be, let us form partnerships. But we don't need to cannibalize each other as churches. We all have our call. We all have things that we're good at. And so if your church is good at feeding the homeless and another church is good at job creation, create a partnership. So if you get people off the street, you get them fed, then you say, hey, now go down to this church down the street. They'll help you get a job and help you become a productive member of the community. We can work together. I think that's how we should operate as a church. We need to get out of this competition mindset. We need to get out of a scarcity, poverty mindset. There's enough work to do. I think Jesus said something about that. It's enough work to do out there. It's enough people that need to be connected to the church, the broader church. And so if we understand what our role is, I try to preach this in Mennonite Church USA, that we are a peace church. We need to live into that because that is a unique call. Many people outside of our denomination appreciate the fact that we are a peace church and utilize some of our resources. But if we live into who we are, I think God will really, really, really bless us. We will be able to do, things greater than we've ever imagined. But if we keep looking over our shoulder, worried about what people are doing down the street or worried about what another pastor is doing, we won't be able to focus and we'll quickly get left behind.
Your next chapter is mission-focused spirituality, and I think it fits in so much as well about focusing in on your mission, right? So your first section there is in focusing in on your identity, focusing in on your mission. You gave me some good helps here in this chapter to think through the focus of my own work. Like how do you focus? How the pastors listening here today, when pastors are being pulled in 100 different directions, how do we focus our ministries? How do we focus our work as ministers?
Yeah, I think part of that chapter really talks about, the power of prayer. Again, we can't discount that. We need that time to talk to God and to see where the Holy Spirit is leading us. I think that's important. I think that's a unique part of who we are as a church. The church has talked a lot about, at least our denominations talked a lot about, this being missional. What does that mean? But we have to understand who we are as a spiritual people. So, proclaiming the gospel of Jesus, worshiping together regularly, intentionally pointing members toward discipleship, using prayer, practicing the things that we preach as people of faith. So understand why we're doing our work. And this is a criticism I think sometimes that I get in my role. People saying, hey, you're just, you're just focusing on progressive things, or you're focusing on social justice. And I always say, hey, no, we need to make sure our social justice, the things that we do, are rooted in the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's part of that mission focused spirituality. Again, we're not just trying to do things. We're not throwing spaghetti on the wall, if you get that analogy, just to see what sticks. No, that's not what we're doing. We're not a social club. We're not entertainers. No, we have a mission, and it's focused on our spirituality as Christians. And so the things that we do need to be connected to that. And we have to understand that God is our source. We are people of faith. We can never lose sight of that. And so sometimes that means listening to the Holy Spirit to say, hey, what are the needs here in the community? What can we do? God, what should we be doing? That doesn't mean having a board and having a board meeting. I know some people may not like that, but we have to have some spiritual discernment, not just processes and procedures, but it has to be rooted in our faith.
Absolutely. You're right. The intellectual growth and spiritual growth need to go hand in hand in the activated church. And, I think about just this last year and the weight that pastors have carried. And how are we caring for our own pastors? How are we encouraging our pastors to take time for their own spiritual growth? When we're like, when are we coming back together? Do we have to wear masks? Do we not have, pastors have been hit with so much in the last year. And as I read this chapter, I was thinking about my own pastor and what are the ways that I need to encourage not only my own spiritual growth, but encourage my pastor as well. How do we encourage church leaders, for those of us who aren't pastors reading this book, that we're not just asking more and more of our pastors and not letting them rest and reset in the Holy Spirit as well.
Yeah. And we really need to, practice the things that I think that we see in the Bible. I talk about practicing, grace both inside and outside of the church, embracing reconciliation and not just simple forgiveness as key components of discipleship. We have to remember what kind of body we are. In some sense, churches can become just this holy huddle, kind of a social club, and we're just focused on tradition, and we're focused on all these rules and procedures, but we are a spiritual body. We can't lose sight of that. And we should probably even encourage our pastors to spend some time in prayer and self-reflection, and not having them just bounce from meeting to meeting, service to service. You would be amazed how many pastors probably don't have a lot of time to focus on spiritual disciplines, because they're so busy. They're so busy doing the work of God that they've gotten outside of the will of God. And that's something we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, I like you bring that together here. We're about halfway through our conversation, so just a few quick reminders for those of you who are joining us here today. Today, I'm talking with Glen Guyton, author of Reawakened, Activate Your Congregation to Spark Lasting Change. It was published by Herald Press in April of 2021. You can buy the book directly from Herald Press or wherever books are sold. Glen, what led you to write this book?
Man, I had worked with a group of us, so I would like to get credit for all this wisdom. Like I just came, like the Lord came and spoke to me.
Right.
But I had the privilege of being mentored by a great pastor, and also connecting with many of our urban leaders early in my career in Mennonite Church USA. And this is really who I got the principles of this book from. So from leaders who were well established, who really connected with their people and that were engaged in their community. And, in some sense, I wanted to leave something behind in my role as executive director. I don't see myself as a theologian. There are many people out there much smarter than I am as far as theology. So I interviewed some of them for this book. But I do see myself as someone who has the gift of administration, and who's really a ministry practitioner. And I wanted to pass that information on. I think one of the biggest gaps we have in the church is leadership. How do people manage church? We have people that have really good, solid theological foundations, but then how do you execute that? How do you lead people? How do you take care of your people? How do you fulfill the mission of the church and not just manage it? We need leaders who are prophetic, who understand who they are, who are willing to roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and who can manage people. This book talks about all of those things, about bringing that focus to ministry to ignite something, to activate something.
Yeah.
I don't believe a shepherd or a pastor is someone that should just be a manager. No, you need to be a leader. You need to inspire people. You need to light a fire under the folks that are a part of your church. That's why, I start off with Ezra and Nehemiah. They found out the power of scripture, of the word of God, and then they took that into something tangible. So they took a group of people that had been isolated, that had been marginalized. They brought them together to say, hey, this is your purpose. This is what we're going to do. And this is your role. This is where you fit. So I want you to work on this, and I want you to help us build this. At the same time, I want you to understand your purpose, your role in this community, and we're going to grow, and we're going to come back greater than ever. And so that's what I want to do. I want to inspire some people in my time. I want our congregations to be strong. I want to give pastors a tool that they can use, as they meet with their boards and others, to say, hey, this is what we should be doing. Hey, this is a blueprint. Let's go through some of these questions. And, that's why I have questions at the end of each chapter, because, this is not a formula per se. These are some guiding principles, and you have to figure out how you will apply this in your context. Each context of ministry is different. You can't necessarily titrate this book into a pill and take it and say, okay, all my problems are solved. No, you're going to have to figure out some things and do some work as a leader or as a community, and figure out, what is it that we want to do? What risk are we willing to take? And how are we going to implement these principles in our context?
You write on page 35 about transformation. And you say that your question is always going to be, is this intentionally designed to bring transformation to the lives of people in your community? And that we need to ask that question for every program or project that we undertake in ministry. I just love that. Keep talking a little bit more about transformation. You give some good stories here too.
Yeah, I mean, we do so much in the church, right? And again, we always try to do more, but why are we doing these things as a church? What is our focus? What is our reason? Too many of us just try to copy what we see somewhere else, and it doesn't always fit. So what is our purpose? Now, can you just do things to have fun in the church? Yeah, you can just do some things to have fun, but just be clear about that. Hey, this is a fun day. We just want to have fun. We want to build relationships between people. But I see so many churches, and I think I talk about this in the book, the church in a box, right? Everybody just has the same formula. You just walk into this church, and it's like, okay, it's like I've been here, just in another city. Everybody has coffee shops. I know a church that has a merry-go-round in it, and I'm like, I'm not saying anything is wrong with those things, but why are you doing that? How are you utilizing your people? What is the end goal of this? Activity doesn't necessarily mean good leadership. Just doing a whole bunch of stuff. And we have to, as leaders, we have to be careful of how we take care of our members. We don't want to just have people running around and we burn them out, and then they are upset and disconnected from the church because we've just used and abused them. But if people know, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is the difference it's going to make it in my community, that's going to create some lifelong relationships. That's going to create energy that's going to continue and to grow. And people know, like, I know how I fit. I can see how the work I'm doing impacts this community. It's not just busy work. It's not just activity, but it's doing something that's greater than myself. So that's what we have to think about when we're doing ministry, when we're designing programs. We don't want to just burn people out. We don't want to just push people to this corner, this corner, and we have nothing to show for it at the end of the day. Why are we doing church? What are some of the tangible, transformative things that we can see? If you go to the store, people sell like all this exercise equipment and all these other things. You're not going to use something that doesn't work. You don't want to just give people a bad product. We want to see change happening in people's lives. That's the only way that the church will continue to grow and to thrive. And there's so many people that have left the church. We see it in all walks of life, from the younger people, millennials, which they're getting old now, but millennials, Gen Z, But we also see it in older people, that are disconnected. Many of the people that have been politically energized are frustrated with the church. They have a religious kind of posture, but they aren't connected to the church because the church hasn't fulfilled their needs. So they're turning to politics. That's part of the reason we have so much polarization, is because the church isn't doing a good enough job of filling those gaps, of restoring hopes to hurting people. We have so many other programs going on, and coffee shops and water park. I went to a church with a water park. I mean, it's fine that you have those, like with a church with a water park. If those things are drawing people into the ministry, if those things are helping people grow and thrive. But if you just have a water park at your church, just have a water park and a coffee shop, what's the purpose of that? I can go to Disney World and do all those things, and it'll be better than what you have in your church parking lot.
Yeah. And how to find that balance, I think, between meeting people where they are, right, on technology or other things, while also not being held captive by popular culture, right?
Right.
So how we respond, you write on page 17 about how the church should not be held captive by popular culture, but it needs to find ways to respond to the changing impact of culture on people. I think that is so important. Talk a little bit more about that. So your church isn't going to do a water park because it's not your focus. It's not your identity. And maybe the water park's a bad example here, but how do we find relevant examples of ways to reach our communities without being held captive by popular culture?
Yes. So one of the things I write is that we perpetually mourn the good old days. We fail to speak to contemporary realities of life. So again, things have changed. People are shopping at home and getting home delivery for things, and so we need to look at the realities of how people live their lives. Have we been focused on people that are commuting for long distances, where we need to be focused on people that are more local, that can walk? I mean, there are a number of ways that we can think about engaging our communities. San Antonio Mennonite Church here is at the center of work with immigration and helping people with that process, because we have a lot of immigrants that come through San Antonio. We have a center here for immigrants, so it's natural that a church here in San Antonio would reach out to that Mexican American, that Latin American population of immigrants. It really fits what's going on in the community. So we have to figure out what those needs are, and not look back for a day when the demographics in our community were different, when the economic realities were different. I think I use an example in the book of a congregation that had two different congregations. The demographics of the neighborhood changed dramatically, so they actually had to change the leadership of the church and do some other things to become relevant. We have to respond to the changing needs of the community. If the racial, ethnic demographics change, maybe we need to change some things about how we lead, how we do service. We can't just mourn and lament the good old days. Those days aren't coming back. We have to embrace technology. I mean, we all have, I tell people, people that are scared of technology in the church, I said, well, you read the printed Bible, right? You know how revolutionary that was at the time, the Gutenberg Bible, that transformed how we do church. So you may have to use Facebook or Twitter or social media, use these things. That's just like the printed press. So how are you going to use these new tools to capture people? You may have to post things online. You may have to stream your service to be relevant. You may have to have a church app or something for people to connect. So those are ways that we have to think about staying relevant. Young people engaged in different ways. You may have to change the time of your service in order to capture people that aren't available at 11 o'clock. If you just always had 11 o'clock service, people may want to meet earlier or later. Do those things. And I'm not trying to not honor the Sabbath. That's not what I'm trying to say. But you may have to connect with people in different ways. They have different work schedules. We have to be flexible at a church, as a church, and understand that even Jesus was somewhat flexible, right? He went to different places. He met with folks that were culturally different from him. He went to where people were. He met in bars and all those other things. And so we have to look at where are the people gathering, what are the needs of our community, and how do we engage with them in ways that are meaningful to them. Can we hold on to some of our traditions? Yeah, of course. That gives us a foundation on which to build upon, but that doesn't mean that we can't incorporate new things. I remember, I don't know if this is still a problem. So I remember when the songs, everybody was putting the songs on overhead projectors with acetate, and folks were really upset about that. Like, you really just couldn't get into the song spiritually. So I don't know if that's a thing and still in some churches, but hey, what's wrong with getting a projector and putting the words on the screen where people can read it? I think God is going to appreciate us either way. If it helps people to be able to see the words better or hear the music better, let's embrace those things. If we have to build a ramp at our church so that people in wheelchairs or people that have trouble walking, that's the same thing. What's the difference? Let's find ways to engage people and make them a part of their community and find ways for them to be relevant. I mean, I even have some worksheets about that if you want to think about being more inclusive, thinking about diversity in your congregation. We have to think through those things. What does a community look like? What will it take to reach those people?
That's where I wanted to go next. So
okay.
Perfect segue. I mean, we didn't even set that up, but it's great. Your fourth characteristic is intentional diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
This is a topic that's all over the news these days. At least it is here in Ohio, where I live. Are we going to have DEI in our schools? Are we not going to have DEI in our schools? And all these kinds of questions. You write there on the bottom of 117, top of 118 about diversity and inclusion, and then you add their intercultural competency. Parse that out for those who haven't read it. Maybe read aloud those parts and talk to us about this spiritual field of dreams. I love that.
Yeah, we probably do a poor job with diversity in the church. That's always been a challenge. And so if we're going to do it, let's not talk about it. Let's be strategic about it. And so if there's an analogy out there about, diversity is being invited to the party, is inclusion is being added to dance. And I tell people how I hate that analogy. I think it's awful. So I say diversity is attending a party with lots of different people. That's what diversity is. Just, different faces, different identities in the same area. Inclusion is being a member of the planning team, helping select the DJ, the menu, and sharing your playlist. So if we're at a party and we really want to be inclusive, things have to change. That's the bottom line. Inclusion is not just bringing a couple of minorities, a couple of international folks into your church. Hey, we're inclusive. No, you have some diversity, but you're not inclusive. Inclusion is being a member of the planning process, helping to select what goes on, the menu, sharing your playlist. And then intercultural competency is the communication and management system used to make it all happen. So how are we relating to each other? How are people engaging and being involved? And so it's a challenge, right, to really be a diverse and inclusive church because we have to give up power. We have to start sharing power. We have to have a understanding that it's not about being colorblind, but it's appreciating all of the colors and characteristics of people that are a part of our communities, that the image of God is not our image. We're created in God's image, but that means that the image of God is diverse, is rich, it's multifaceted. And so we have to embrace those things. One of the things I say, which I think is, again, it's a challenge for the church. I'm not saying that anyone that I really know has perfected this. You have to work at it, but there can be unity of vision and mission amid other aspects of diversity. We can be at the same party and dance differently. That's the one thing that we have to learn as a church. We can all be at the same party. We can even be playing the same music. That doesn't mean we all have to dance the same. We can have our own moves, and some of those moves might be a little uncoordinated, a little clumsy, but I believe that we can do that. We have to find space for that. But let's be intentional about what we mean when we talk about diversity and inclusion. I'm not a fan of tokenism. For many years, there's been a colonial model of doing church. Even as we've done missions, we've gone to a country and told people everything that you do is wrong. You need to do it like us. We can't do that any longer because I think our God is bigger than that. There is some diversity within how we connect with God. We have to appreciate that. We can have really strong foundation. I encourage that, you know, if you're part of a Mennonite church, an Anabaptist church, or a Methodist church, and you've joined that church, yeah, there are some foundational things that we all need to kind of focus on and accept, but that doesn't mean that the execution of those things will be the same. And so being strategic about diversity is just kind of say, hey, what are we going to focus on? Do we want racial diversity? And then how are we going to get there? And then how are we going to include those people once they become a part of our congregation? You know, there are many congregations that are racially diverse as far as the membership, but then all the leadership is white. I find that somewhat problematic. If we are really going to be inclusive, have diverse leadership too. Have people that are in the pews be a part of that planning process, people that are part of that community be a part of the decision making, and not just function as tokens. Some congregations want to focus on, you know, ability identity. So, you know, how do you make your church more inclusive to people that are, you know, deaf, or, you know, have hearing, listening impaired, visually impaired, or have other physical limitations? How do you engage those people? You can't just kind of just put those people on the side. No, you have to, people need to be involved and understand what it means to authentically come to these, you know, participate in worship. You know, even at convention, we have some things. I'm not saying we do it perfectly, but we had gotten some advice on how to present from the stage in a way that will engage people that may be visually impaired or hearing impaired. How can we do things better so those people really feel authentically like they're a part of the service? And so churches really just have to think through those things, what they mean. So leadership is important. Setting goals, not just talking about this, but setting goals. And then I go through the book about, you know, getting the right knowledge. So understanding the different levels of cultural knowledge, cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, and cultural competence. You know, those are all kind of different levels in which you can engage these cultural differences. And it has to be intentional. Um, um, and you really have to have, you know, really talk to leaders and people that are different from you, get them in the room, get them on the planning team, let them have a voice. And that means your church is going to change, right? It means it's not going to be like your grandmother's church. And if you aren't okay with that, then just say, hey, we're not going to focus on this. We just want everyone to look like us. And I've been to churches like that. They say, hey, we want to talk about diversity and how to grow the church. And I get to the church and I find out they just want more people to look like them. That's their choice. So.
Well, I mean, this is obviously a topic that you do external consulting and training on and have for some time. I think your tools that church leaders, you know, the questions that you ask here in this chapter, you know, 124, the end of chapter questions, and then the resources at the back too, are a real help for pastors who are trying to figure out, you know, ways forward on this. We only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we take time for some questions too. Glenn, talk to us a little bit about all these resources at the back of the book and what you have put together to make this so relevant.
Yeah. So again, so each chapter has some questions to help you think through each of the principles that I outline in the book. So you can go through it with your leadership team or by yourself, but to think through what each of these characteristics of a activated church, what it means for you and your community, and how you would implement that. So I have some questions to lead you through that. Then at the back of the book, I have a few resources, like an event planning guide if you're thinking about being more diverse and inclusive in your event planning. Concert of prayer. Again, I love the concert of prayer. To me, it's like a really simple thing, but it's just a phenomenal tool to bring everyone together to pray, to have guided prayer as a congregation. Let's see, responding to a crisis as a congregation. I think that's really one of the things that a tool that I hope leaders would look at. You know, how do you prepare when something happens? How do you respond to crises as a leader? I think that's really, really important, and it really can make or break a leader in a church. Then, you know, I do have a couple of resources on diversity and inclusion. That's probably one of my stronger areas. So, you know, check those out if you're really interested in diversity and inclusion. And I know everyone isn't. I mean, even if you aren't interested in that, I would hope you are. But if you aren't interested in that, there are many different aspects of diversity that you can focus on. You know, I talk about generational diversity. So that's an important piece. Oh, I talk I give some recommendations. What do you do if you don't have, like, you're not in a diverse community? Well, you can create partnerships. There are a number of different ways. None of what I write is about being artificial or fake. It's about how do you authentically do these things in your context. And then I give a few examples of how you can work outside of your limitations. You can't be all things to all people. You don't have to be. Create some partnerships, bring in some other people, you know, develop relationships that enhance who you are as a body. You don't have to do this thing alone. You don't have to be an isolated church. You don't have to be on an island. Create those community partnerships. I even, for some people to have some strong opinions about our abolition curriculum, I even talk about partner with police in this book. So how do you do that in your community? Creating strategic partnerships with political leaders, with law enforcement. You know, those are things that are important, and those things will look different depending on what community you are a part of.
Great. Any final comments?
Oh, for me, I see some questions.
Yeah.
No, I hope you buy the book. And, you know, if you have some feedback, I would love your feedback, and I would definitely appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for participating in our conversation here today. We appreciate your time and your insights. And like Glenn, I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of Reawakened. Copies are available directly from Herald Press and wherever books are sold. So thank you so much, Glenn, for your powerful words. And thank you to all who have joined us here today.
All right,
until next time.